Hello, and welcome to a special bonus episode of Allegedly Astrology, where we break down the astrology that happened during some of the biggest scandals and events in history. Dana, what are we covering on this episode?
Today, we're talking about the Menendez brothers.
This is going to be a 3-part series, and we're going to release the first 2 parts on the main feed, and the third will be exclusive to Patreon. So you'll have to subscribe to Patreon to hear it, and our patrons will get first access to parts 1 and 2. So let's get into it. Lyle and Erik Menendez are brothers who are convicted of killing their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, in their family home in 1989. And the brothers are currently serving life sentences in San Diego, California. And Lyle and Erik's story has been covered extensively in TV movies, documentaries, and podcasts. But 2024 especially was a huge year for them. And that's because it was announced that the brothers may be resentenced thanks to the increased public scrutiny of their case following a Netflix documentary, a Ryan Murphy show, and a big TikTok influence campaign, basically. So let's learn about them and their astrology.
Okay, so obviously this is about 2 brothers, Lyle and Erik, and their parents, who were Jose and Kitty. Jose Enrique Menendez, which is their dad, was from Cuba. He met Kitty while they were in college. Overall, they're a super rich family, mainly because the dad was the CEO of Live Entertainment, which was a Los Angeles video distributing company. He also had other very big positions after that. And Kitty, who was the mom, was a socialite, a lady who lunched kind of vibes.
And we'll get more into the details of their family life a little later when we get into the trial. But overall, their father exerted immense pressure on them to succeed in school and athletics. And it was definitely more than just your tough dad persona. It was very, scary. So Joseph Lyle, who goes by his middle name, was the oldest son. So let's check out him and his big 3.
Okay, Joseph was born on January 10th, 1968 at 12:10 p.m. in New York City, and he is a Capricorn sun, a Taurus moon, and a Taurus rising. So this is very much, I guess, stereotypical rich kid placements, except for he has all the dark versions.
Yeah.
So he's a Capricorn sun. Capricorn suns are disciplined, helpful, strategic, responsible. They hold the weight of the world. You can count on them for anything, but Capricorn placements are also most likely to get parentified by adults in their lives. And since the son's the father, it can look like a dad who gets competitive with his own son. And also, if you asked him, will deny that fact to the death. And the sun is ruled by Saturn, and his Saturn is in fall in Aries in his natal 12th house of secrets, hidden enemies, self-destruction, and psychic attacks. And Saturn in fall in Aries is you never really learn how to do things yourself. You get disciplined in a way that's for who you are. It's tough. But also Saturn rejoices in the 12th house, which is also the house of prison. So a little bit of a spoiler, maybe he likes it there. And then he's a Taurus moon, and the moon is exalted in Taurus, and Taurus moons are sensual, and they're in tune with their bodies and their needs. It's extra relevant since he's also a Taurus rising, which means his moon is in his first house of body, health, personality, and perspective. And Taurus is a sign of wealth, so it tracks that he was born into a wealthy family, but his natal Venus is in Sagittarius in his 8th house of inheritance, and the 8th house is a dark house. It's related to therapy because it's a house of trauma and resentment, and it's a house where we don't have full control, and so other people can sort of get in there and violate your boundaries unless you have really strong ones if you have 8th house placements, or if you have an 8th house transit.
I feel like there were no boundary, obviously, from what we know, and we'll get to this later in the episode, violating of boundaries was a huge theme for their life.
Yeah, well, so his moon's also opposite Neptune in Scorpio, and that's in his 7th house, which would be where, the 7th house would be where people come in and violate your boundaries, the 7th and 8th. I mean, they can violate them in any house based on how they do it, but you're especially susceptible there because that's the other, so that's the opponent. And so Neptune also opposite his moon makes him he did not learn boundaries for sure. He had to learn them later. But he has a Virgo stellium in his 5th house with Jupiter in detriment, Pluto and Uranus. And all 3 planets are retrograde, and Uranus stationed retrograde 6 days earlier at the Antarctic degree, making it extra potent. It's very volatile, unpredictable. And Virgo's a sign of purity. It's literally, it's the word where we derive the word virgin from. And the fifth house is related to both children and sex. And so this sort of represents a loss of innocence, getting fooled. Pluto here is all about power games. And then Jupiter there, it would be good, but it's in detriment. So he's really lacking the resources and like the goodwill that a lot of other people might get.
Yeah, he was definitely more of, people would say, like the hot-headed brother, which is interesting because it's a lot of like earth sign.
Yeah, but his rising is ruled by Venus and Sagittarius, so he still has that. Yeah,
he still has
just like you, Sarah.
Oh yeah, we're just two Venus and Sag twins. And then we have the younger brother, Erik, and Erik was really into tennis. He was really good at it. At one point, he was actually ranked 44th in the United States. So what's his chart looking like?
His is crazy too. So he was born on November 27th, 1970 at 11:23 p.m. in Livingston, New Jersey. And he has a Sagittarius sun, a Scorpio moon, and a Virgo rising. So a Sagittarius sun is confident, right? It's a fun tennis playing athlete, optimistic, naive, dogmatic, fun, a real go-getter. And his sun is in his fourth house of parents and family. And oftentimes this placement can be sheltered in a positive way.
I have a fire sign sun in my fourth house.
Yeah. Sorry, you do too.
And it is very like my identity is very tied to my family.
Yeah.
I feel
you
like
have a great family.
Sometimes I feel very like naive about other things. I mean, as I get older, I'm not, but like growing up.
That's so cute. Yeah, I love that. And your family is great. So that's helpful. But yeah, so this placement can be sheltered, but if a placement can be sheltered, it can also mean that it's a lack of shelter. So what also complicates this is that his Neptune is exactly conjunct his IC in Sagittarius. And the IC is the root. It's the early childhood programming. And Neptune is just obliteration and intoxication. So all the boundaries are blurred. The route where you should find your stability is tenuous at best. He's really sort of lacking coherent understanding of what that would mean. And he also has Mercury in detriment here in Sagittarius. And that's also tough because his mind will be thinking about things that are big or trying to be optimistic to avoid facts, or just also maybe he got lied to, or maybe he lies. The Sagittarius placements are also ruled by Jupiter in Scorpio, which is conjunct his fallen moon and Venus retrograde and in detriment, which is a crazy placement to have. So his Scorpio moon, again, it's in fall. Planets in fall tend to get taken advantage of and might have to fight for respect. The moon is the body, and it's what we need to feel secure. And with Venus retrograde and in detriment here, he's deprived of love. He is deprived of support. He maybe gets violated, and he really has to learn how to meet his own needs and has to like fight for it. But also with Venus stationed direct 2 days later. And so this placement is super potent. Whenever a placement is retrograde and whenever it's in detriment and whenever it's stationing, it's just extra potent. And this just means like he really yearns for love and a deep kind of love, but he's like weird about it because at some point all of his efforts for his bids for affection were thwarted. And the moon's the mother, and people who have Scorpio moons can often have a mother who really went through some shit, or they might have a mother who's volatile and unpredictable. But Scorpio is really about like, the Scorpio placements tend to be super empathetic because every Scorpio placement has probably gone through something. I can't imagine that they haven't. And it's like, it marks them and it changes them, and they get used to change and upheaval. And so when the moon is there and it's like what you need to feel stable, it's just really rocking the boat. And it could be also a mother who takes out her, like the kid could become a scapegoat or like abused, a punching bag.
That definitely happened. Yeah. I mean, we'll learn later but obviously their father was abusive in a lot of ways. And the mother was definitely like coped through alcoholism, like a lot of things. And so I feel like definitely they did not have a mother that mothered them in any sort of way.
It's so sad. So she could have been unpredictable. His Scorpio placements are ruled by Mars, which is in detriment in Libra in his second house of possession. So he gets taken advantage of. He feels like he has no idea what to do. And this can also look like being treated like a possession. Maybe he learned that he's a possession, which is also common among people who have Venus and Scorpio, I have noticed. And then, he's a Virgo rising. So he's intelligent, helpful, service-oriented, really eager to please, critical of himself and others, and can get obsessive, and is ruled by that Mercury, which is detriment in his fourth house of parents. And planets in detriment just lack resources. So even though he's wealthy, his parents didn't provide him with, that solid foundation, and maybe they lied to him. And planets in detriment really just have to figure out how to do things on their own, which can look like rebellion, which means if your parents are already not doing a good job of parenting, the kids will get in trouble they'll get chastised for, being rebellious. So it's sort of like getting in trouble for not knowing how to do something no one taught you how to do.
Right.
So that's his chart.
Okay. So the family eventually moves from the East Coast to Calabasas, California, where all the rich people live, basically, famously home of the Kardashians. And the brothers run with a crowd of young, spoiled rich kids, and they committed multiple burglaries in their neighborhood.
And eventually this kind of out of control behavior caused the family to move out of Calabasas to Beverly Hills. And around this time, Lyle goes to Princeton, but, he's getting bad grades. He gets suspended for plagiarism. And Erik is in high school playing tennis. But while in high school, he writes a screenplay called Friends, which is about a rich kid that killed his parents in the perfect murder for their inheritance money.
And from the outside, the family seems pretty normal and put together, but behind closed doors, as is often true, all was not what it seemed. Allegedly, Kitty was an alcoholic and Jose was physically and sexually abusive to both sons. And there was a lot of tension in the family.
Yeah, so much tension that the boys were like, we need to protect ourselves. So they go and buy shotguns. And then one night while Kitty and Jose are watching TV, Lyle and Erik decided to shoot them to death. There was like some sort of altercation that occurred. And Jose was shot 6 times, including a fatal shot to the back of his head. And Kitty was shot 10 times. And at the time of the murder, Lyle was 21 and Erik was 18.
Yeah. And they tried a few things to get an alibi. So they left the house and then came back and then called the police. And Lyle called the police and he was crying and saying someone had killed their parents. And police arrived to the scene and Lyle and Erik ran out of the house towards them screaming. And those that worked the crime scene said it was one of the most brutal ones they had encountered. Mostly because, they were shot at close range with a shotgun, which is not meant for that. It wasn't like a handgun. These are large bullets and they were shot multiple times. So it was a very gruesome scene.
And like Elise was saying, Lyle and Erik were trying to get alibis. So they falsely told officers that they were somewhere else at the time. Didn't they say they were at a movie or they went to a carnival or something?
Yeah, they went to a movie and then a food festival to try to be seen by people.
Yeah. And then Lyle also kind of dropped hints that maybe their parents' killing was business related. They tried to imply that the mafia had put a hit out on their parents. So what was going on when Jose and Kitty were killed?
They really didn't even have the resources to lie about that. A mafia? I don't know. Okay, so
and it's just crazy because the police didn't even consider them as suspects. It was so crazy the way that the police handled this murder in general, which is often the case of any murders that are talked about. It's just the police always botch it. But what you have to remember is Beverly Hills, you don't see these kind of things all the time. You would just never think that this could be this kind of family. What came out about this family was so shocking. And so I think it was handled pretty bad.
Yeah. I believe that. So the murder happened on August 20th, 1989, between 8 and 9 p.m. in Beverly Hills. And this chart would have had, there's a sun in Leo, a moon in Aries, and the Pisces rising until 8:55 p.m. So probably Pisces rising. And so the sun in Leo and the moon in Aries are all about passion and action and also drama. So hitting someone, I guess, at a point blank range with a shotgun seems kind of, on brand for that. The sun's in domicile in Leo. It feels empowering. It wants to, embody its identity and express itself. The moon in Aries feels similarly and also seeks revenge. It's ruled by Mars, the planet of war and, breaking in. And then there's a Pisces rising. So it's creative. It's, delusions. It's really buying into its own sort of delusion to a need to escape, but also a desire to be liberated. And so it's ruled by Jupiter, which is exalted in Cancer in the 5th house of children. And Jupiter also rules the midheaven. So the point of action, this is all about really sort of a desperate desire to liberate themselves. And maybe they had fun doing it too. Jupiter in the 5th could be having a nice time, or maybe it's just relief. But Jupiter is also opposite Saturn in Capricorn. And so when planets are opposed to each other, it's always about conflict. Oppositions are about conflict. The Sun-Saturn opposition is like an archetypal conflict. The Sun-Saturn opposition is very much a conflict between father and son. And also Saturn is in the 11th house, which is the house of like hope and goodwill, and sort of just like, we're hopeless. Like, we need to do this. And Jupiter, again, is a chart ruler, and it's in the 5th house of children, but it's also with Chiron, which is the asteroid of primordial wounds. So I guess this is them healing. And Cancer, the Cancer 5th house is ruled by that vengeful moon in Aries, which is in the 2nd house of possessions. And Mars is in Virgo, conjunct the descendant. So this is really a fight for purity and innocence, if you remember what Virgo stands for, the virgin. And there's also Mercury and Venus in fall in the 7th house. So Mercury really supports it. It's the grand plan, but it's also getting caught, I think.
Let's just take a second for this one.
Mm-hmm.
This is all very crazy. Just like of how this chart is playing out, and even especially how you were describing the Pisces rising part. This was a delusional way to do this, right? It came out afterwards. It could have very easily been tied back to them. So it's a delusional way to do this. But they felt such a need to be free.
Yeah.
And like you said, it just was sort of, how do they heal these horrible wounds that have been inflicted on them for decades almost, you know? So I can see how this is playing out in their heads, even though it's so insane for people from the outside looking in to understand.
Yeah. And Venus is also domicile in Libra in the 8th house, which sort of feels like it's a desperate group for balance. Like, we need to take this back because, you know, they weren't really given a chance despite having so much money. And then also, this was 4 days after a total lunar eclipse in Aquarius, which was a North Node eclipse. So we're moving forward, and it's in the sign of the sun's detriment. So Aquarius has to take matters into its own hands. I've noticed a lot of Aquarius artists succeed independently because the establishments don't give them a chance. They always, you know, people don't believe in them. So this is also maybe just not knowing what to do. So you take the reins and then kill your parents. And then just looking at their personal transits, Joseph was in a 10th house Aquarius Saturn year, and his natal Saturn is in fallen Aries, but it's rejoicing in the 12th house. So it's about either, you know, going to prison, but also seeking escape. His solar return Aquarius had the moon, Mercury, and midheaven there. And on the day of the murder, the sun and south node were conjunct his solar return IC, which really speaks to the parents. So the south node is, you know, taking something away, and the sun is shining a light. I guess it's the drama, but also it's a spotlight of, this is your root, and it's being uprooted. And his solar return ascendant was in Gemini in his 2nd house of possessions and earning. And his solar return Mars is domicile in Aries, conjunct his natal north node in his 12th house at the time of murder. And the transiting moon was conjunct his natal north node and his solar return Mars. So this really lined up in a way that sort of reflects what was happening at the moment. And also in his 12th house, like, trying to make a story about it.
And also when she means like Joseph, she means Lyle, because it's Joseph Lyle. But it is interesting that he's in that like 10th house Aquarius year, and that's where the North Node was, because basically what he's known for is killing his parents.
Yeah.
And also too, just like the Gemini and his 2nd house of earnings, even in the murder chart, how the 5th house where Jupiter is ruled by Mars in the 2nd house. After this happens, they do just start like spending tons and tons of money. So the results of the killing in their year is like they get a huge inheritance and they just start spending it.
So suspicious.
Yeah, there was something he did where I was like, wow, you said like truly 21.
Right. Not just with their horrible childhood that affected their psyche, they were also just very clearly like boys whose frontal lobes had not developed. Like they did no planning for the future.
Yeah. And also like,
it was not well calculated.
They weren't even like socialized. So yeah, I don't know.
Yes, that's true. They were not socialized. It was just crazy.
And then looking at Erik's chart, so he was in a 7th house Pisces Jupiter year. His natal Pisces, he has a descendant here, so it's about opponents. His natal Jupiter is in Scorpio in his 3rd house of siblings. his solar return North Node was in Pisces. And his solar return Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini, exactly conjunct his natal midheaven. So this is the point of liberation. Jupiter in Gemini is in detriment. So it's going to have to get creative with how it takes things. And it can also get really hung up on details. So it seems like he was like, no, it was a mafia hit, getting a little too involved with the story and probably other things that I don't know about. And then his solar return ascendant is in Sagittarius in his natal 4th house of parents. And it's conjunct his Uranus, which is all about, shock, surprise. A lot of times it's a surprising death. And his solar return midheaven is conjunct his natal Uranus in Libra in his 2nd house. So, a surprise windfall of cash, but also one that he took action towards receiving, which is what the midheaven's about. And then his solar return, Mars is domicile in Aries, conjunct his natal Chiron in his 8th house. And the 8th house, again, is about where you can often get taken advantage of and where you might really have to draw boundaries and take things back that are, yours. So that happened. And then, of course, Chiron's about primordial wounds. And Mars is just like not having it anymore. And it was also his first nodal return. So his natal South Node is in Leo in his 12th house. And his sun was there, conjunct his natal South Node. And he got, banished to prison. But also, the secret was revealed, which is interesting because it's a sun there. So
it is interesting looking at both of their charts for this year because the parallels, like obviously they have different transits, but there's still some similar houses or themes that they're experiencing. Like both of them have 2nd house stuff going on, which again is money. Erik has 4th house stuff with family. They both have 12th house stuff too for prison or like secrets. But I always find it fascinating how people could experience the same event. And even though they don't have the same transits exactly, like they have similar themes for that year in their chart.
That is truly wild.
Like not all of it's crazy.
I should note is that this would have been the year that Lyle's progressed Chiron was stationing direct. So that Mars there is also like he's moving forward. He's no longer internalizing it. It's coming out of its cage.
It's coming out of the cage. Yeah. And it's interesting because even though, it's hard to say, but in terms of how this all went down, and we'll find out a lot about all of this, this all kind of comes out during the trial. But Lyle was the brother who was like, let's do this, like, let's get it done. And Erik was the one, I think, that came up with the idea. And then Lyle was like, we must execute this. So I think that's interesting of sort of the coming out of the cage.
Yeah.
It really was. That's exactly really what happened.
Freakish.
But yeah, this is an interesting start. So this is part 1. We have learned about all the family members involved, what was going on during the murders, which that murder chart is crazy. And then the next episode, part 2, will be focusing on the trials and the confessions. And there was just so much that came out during this time. And again, 2 trials, which is very interesting in and of itself. So thank you guys so much for listening and supporting the podcast. And we'll see you in part 2. I'm Elise.
I'm Dana. And I'm Sarah.
And this is Allegedly Astrology. Bye.
Bye.